Well, it's good to see you. Glad you came. Have a seat. You know you're welcome here. I was thinking a lot the other day about growing up. You know, my grandkids are growing up in a whole different world than I knew. When I was a kid, we lived about 50 miles from where my parents grew up, and we visited quite often. A little town called Fenworth, and it was a great little place. I remember the end of summer when we went to visit, and that was Labor Day weekend. Now, Labor Day always meant two things. School was about to start, and summer was over, and it was time to meet Cousin Samuel and his family and go on our annual fishing trip. I personally didn't think that much about the start of school. It was okay, but my sisters flipped out about this thing, and it was the whole event of the year. We would go shopping for school supplies and new clothes with my mother. Now, my dad never went shopping with us for school supplies or school clothes, and he was a smart man. Mom and my sisters would pore over all the ads and the brochures and anything they might have got about school supplies, every flyer, and they read them from front to back, and they had it all looked through. Me, all I needed was some paper, a couple of pencils, but they made up this list that was like half a mile long. Bright and early on the first day of the sale for back to school, off we'd go on this meticulously planned trip that rivaled the invasion of Europe. I got my paper and my pencils, and then I'd quietly drift off to whatever department I could find away from them, so I didn't have to get involved in what was coming next. They would take 10 minutes to decide on what type of notebook they wanted, and then another 15 minutes on what color it ought to be. After notebooks, well, it would be lunch boxes, and so on, and so on, and so on. Now, somewhere around mid-morning, we'd stop, have Coke, have some little refreshment of some sort, and they would talk about every single thing they'd bought, they'd thought of buying, that they'd looked at, and they maybe might buy sometime. I never got involved in that conversation. There was no room for me in that conversation. But then it was time to go school clothes shopping. Now, I had plenty of good, comfortable clothes, but oh no, none of them would do for the start of school. So I wound up with new stiff jeans and long sleeve shirts. It was August. It was 110 degrees outside in the shade, but I had respectful long sleeve shirts to wear to school and jeans that could stand up by themselves. Buying for me was quick. Now, buying for my sisters, that would be a rest of the day affair. I had learned not to protest or to run off. It was best to stand around until they kind of went in this blind shopping gear and forgot you were even with them, and then you could drift on off to the sports department or the toy department or wherever you were, and you could kind of get lost for the rest of the day. Well, when we made it back home and unloaded all this stuff we had bought, my sisters had to put on a fashion show for my dad. My sisters presented every purchase for his opinion. And he'd sit there with a fixed smile, and he'd say, "Perfect," and always told them that what they had chosen was perfect. Now, his one-word answer was just what they wanted to hear, and it saved his breath and kept him from having to really pay attention to what was going on. Except, my mom always got a new outfit for the start of school, and my dad would watch her modeling really close. And when he said perfect and he smiled, he meant it. It was really fun to watch. I threw my stuff on the dresser. I stood my new jeans in the corner, and I hung those long sleeve shirts in the closet. Maybe winter will come a little early this year. The Friday of Labor Day weekend, my dad always took off from his work. It was his annual fishing trip at the LaSalle River near Fenworth, where he grew up, with cousin Samuel, who was also one of my dad's boyhood friends. They had started this tradition when they had both graduated high school, and except for the war years and family tragedy or any natural disaster, it was set in stone that they would meet each Labor Day weekend for fishing together. Now, with the passage of time, this annual fishing trip between them had become a family outing, and we all looked forward to it. Dad, cousin Samuel, Mom and Samuel's wife Thelma, me and my sisters, and Samuel's family of Tommy, Denise, and Angela was a good match. We all pretty much had counterparts our same age, and we liked each other, and we enjoyed doing things together. Well, we got to that camping spot just about an hour or so after cousin Samuel and his family. Now, they had this big camper on this big truck, and they were towing a new fishing boat with the outboard motor. We had our car, and we had our pop-up camper trailer that we brought with us. I helped Dad unhook, and we set up the trailer, and then we started setting out fishing gear and folding chairs, Coleman lantern, Coleman stove, and the big ice chest that we brought. Then I was given the job, along with Tommy, of going out and gathering up a lot of firewood for the big campfire that we'd have for the whole family. I watched my dad getting gear together, and he'd look up at me every now and again, and then we'd both look at the camper on that truck, and it was all we could do to keep from laughing. See, cousin Samuel and Thelma, they'd bought that camper and that big truck years ago when he got a nice promotion, and they really had no children, and it was cousin Samuel's pride and joy. Now, cousin Samuel drove most of the time, and Thelma drove. He always sat next to her on the seat and made sure that she had no problems and that she drove correctly. Thelma was a real sweet lady, and she loved her husband. So she grit her teeth and have a nice smile and sit up tall and drive correctly for cousin Samuel. Now, the story we heard was that cousin Samuel had been up all night fishing, and he was so tired he went in the back of the camper to take a nap, and he let Thelma drive alone for once. Well, Thelma came to this big long hill, and she was stuck behind a big old semi that was barely moving to make the grade. So she stopped the truck and the camper to give the time for the guy to get ahead of her so she could make a run at the hill. Now, cousin Samuel woke up and he heard the motor running on the truck, but he knew the camper wasn't moving and it was stopped on the road. Now, he was sure Thelma was in trouble. So he climbed out of the camper, not even bothering to put his pants on, and he just got his bare feet down on the pavement when the truck left. Thelma stepped on the gas to make it up that hill and drove right off and left cousin Samuel standing in the middle of the paved road in his underwear. Thelma had that gas pedal all the way down to make that hill, and she never heard cousin Samuel yelling and hollering, and she made good time going up that hill, leaving cousin Samuel standing pantless in the middle of the paved road, waving his arms and hollering for her to stop. Now, when Thelma stopped for gas and she went back to the camper to get money to pay for it, she was astonished to find that cousin Samuel wasn't in the camper. Maybe he'd wandered off. Where did he go? And then it kind of struck her as funny that he left his pants in the camper, and she knew he wouldn't leave without those. So she headed back, and she finally found cousin Samuel. He was standing behind a street sign, waving and hollering at her with no pants on. Now, Thelma innocently told my mom that she had never seen a person with that red a face in her whole life. My mom told us all that story much later, but it was never told around cousin Samuel. It was my mom and dad's favorite story. Dad and cousin Samuel, they got the boat on the river, And we went out and set up jug lines, and then they started in for some serious fishing. Now, my dad was a good fisherman, and he could just snap his wrist and cast that lure to any spot he wanted to. But now Cousin Samuel, he had to stand up and give it a big old wind up before he'd cast. And you learned to stay low when Cousin Samuel was casting in the boat. My mom and Thelma would put on their straw hats, and they'd spread an old blanket on the riverbank under some nice shade tree. They'd cast out a few cane poles, and then they'd have a good visit. Now, Mom always put little bells on the cane poles, and when one rang, well, the ladies would pull it in and find out if they'd caught anything, rebait the hook, and cast it back on out in the river. It drove my dad crazy that my mom always had a bigger catch than he did. I personally believed that if he had not had to spend his time ducking every time Cousin Samuel went out there to cast, he'd have had a lot bigger catch. Now, I wasn't much for fishing, so I got my baseball stuff out that I'd brought, and me and Tommy, we'd play catch or we'd hit fly balls, and my sisters got out the board games, and we'd play those, and everybody just had a good time. Tommy and I, now, we had the job of tending those jug lines, and it wasn't bad. The river wasn't too deep, and the water was nice and cool, and we would paddle along next to the boat, check out the lines every few hours or so, and it was easy work, and the swim was refreshing. Cousin Samuel always went with me and Tommy and made sure that we did things correctly. Now, he always told us that the reason he went with us was to protect us from snakes. The fact was, Cousin Samuel was deathly afraid of snakes. Tommy and I had never seen a snake on the river. We'd never seen one in a camping spot we'd been at. We just did our work and kept quiet. Friday and Saturday passed with a lot of fun, and it was a good time for everybody. Saturday evening, we started to put things away for our trip home. See, tomorrow was Sunday, and that was the day you went to church. Now, Cousin Samuel had left the jug lines out to the last minute on the trip, so Tommy and I went back out to check them one last time and to bring them in, with Cousin Samuel going along to make sure we did things correctly and we were well protected from snakes. We ran the jugs on the far shore and were coming back to the camping spot on the near shore near the landing when Tommy poked me in the ribs. He'd just pulled up a jug line and he had an eel on it. The shadows were getting kind of dark, especially near the bank where we were, and Tommy giggled. He took the eel off the line and he tossed it in the boat with Cousin Samuel and he yelled, "Snake!" That eel landed right on the deck of the boat, right at Cousin Samuel's feet. He jumped up, grabbed his tackle box, tore open the lid, pulled out his Colt Woodman .25 caliber automatic pistol, and proceeded to blast away at that snake wiggling at his feet. Now, that pistol had an 8-shot clip, and he got those all off in one big hurry. He then stood there, pistol in hand, triumph on his face as the boat began to fill with water and sink into the river. John Paul Jones would not have been prouder, as Cousin Samuel went down with the boat bravely, facing the shore and threatening the future existence of Tommy, his only son. I looked up from the river, and there was the whole family standing on the bank, and they were all bent over, laughing, slapping their thighs. It was a sight to see. Well, we did get the boat up, and we said our goodbyes until next year. Cousin Samuel had had a serious talk with Tommy about the correctness of practical jokes, and then he put his arm around Tommy and he started to laugh. He said it must have been something to see. So I knew Tommy wasn't in any real trouble at this point, and his future existence was probably assured. We drove off our separate ways, and I sat in the back seat of the car while Mom and Dad talked in the front seat about the weekend and who was the better fisher. Every now and again, one of them would say, snake, and then they'd start laughing. I enjoyed that ride home. It was a real good time. I sat in the back seat by the side window, and I enjoyed the cool breeze on my face. I kept thinking of the places that maybe I could hide those long sleeve shirts, at least until the cool weather came. Well, it's sure good to see you. And you're always welcome here, so don't stay away too long. Y'all come back. You hear?